All right, and joining us now is Dwight Mitchell and his organization. Best way to find him is Family Preservation Foundation. Is it .org? Did you say?
.org.
.org. Dwight is somebody. It's been a couple of years since I've talked to you, Dwight, and just to let the audience know, Dwight is an excellent source of information about what happens with CPS. He's got a lot of information about how to handle it if you've got a somebody, family member, or maybe a neighbor who doesn't like you or your family because maybe you're homeschooling or they just don't like you and they sick the CPS on you. You haven't done anything. Your first response is to, well, come on in and investigate. Say, I've got nothing to hide. He explains why that's not the right approach because that type of thing happened to him. So he's got a lot of stuff to help you about that, and he's constantly working. As that type of thing had happened to Dwight, he realized just how big this was. He said, at first you think it's just this out-of-control CPS worker that's there. But this is a nationwide thing, billions of dollars being involved. So thank you for joining us, Dwight, and thank you for telling people how the right way to handle this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, David. I mean, I seem to be an activist on most fronts. I've been doing CPS for the better part of 10 years now. Most people don't realize I'm also an NRA firearms instructor.
Oh, good.
So I'm constantly giving classes on that. And so I was listening to the program and, you're talking about gun control and gun violence. And just as I've done at CPS, I've gotten to the numbers. I'm like, what are the numbers? Mm-hmm. And then when you look at the numbers don't belie the story, the propaganda that's being provided, by our government. Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's not that I'm anti-government. I think it's certain people within that institution who are not doing what they're designed, what they're supposed to be doing.
That's right.
It's like the politicians that say, we're going to uphold the Constitution. And the very first thing they do is go in and try and rewrite the Constitution. I'm just like, well, you swore to uphold the Constitution. The Second Amendment is in the Constitution. You CPS workers, you swore to uphold, the duties of your office. We know about the Fourth and the 14th Amendment. We know about due process. So we know about all of these things.
That's right.
Just recently, this past year, which was a huge win for parents in the state of New Jersey, which is where our second office is the New Jersey Supreme Court has finally said that CPS workers need to stop taking children away from parents based upon allegations. It has to be based on facts. Parents are not required to show why they should be a parent. It's a presumption of innocence. I mean, the Supreme Court actually had to say, if you're accusing a parent of not being fit, then you must show through evidence that this parent is not fit. Not the other way around. The parent doesn't need to show you why they should be allowed to keep their children.
And yet it's what we're seeing everywhere. I was talking about that earlier in the program, Dwight. The fact that, because this is coming from a bureaucracy, you've got to prove that you're innocent, right? You got to prove that you don't have a virus or something. You got to prove that you're a good parent to them. And they can just confiscate your car with civil asset forfeiture. They can confiscate your kids. Right. And then you got to come back and sue them. There is no presumption of innocence. They shut down due process. They won't talk to, as you've talked about it many times, this is very difficult getting information from CPS to even find out why they came, to your house.
Right. Correct. I mean, the last case, we just finished 2 in Minnesota and that we won and in New Jersey, we won our last case also. It's more difficult in Minnesota because it still has that old regime. But in New Jersey, you can literally come to the prosecutors now and you don't have to say anything. You don't have to prove anything. They have to provide all the evidence to the court. And then you have the ability to refute it. So that's wonderful progress. Still it's getting people. Our biggest, especially since COVID, but one of the things that we've been very difficult is getting in front of the parents and getting our message to the parents and getting them not to talk. And yes. I get so many calls on a daily basis, with hundreds. And it's like, where are you? And they'll call 3, 4, 5 months down the road and they'll say, but the CPS workers X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, but I can't help you now because you've already, gone into an agreement with the government. Mm-hmm. So any document that you sign from the very first day saying, I will work with you. I will do whatever it is to get my children back. Now you have entered into a formal agreement.
That's right.
And when I tell the parents, I wish you had contacted us earlier so we could have advised or guide you. You know, they said, well, I did speak to a lawyer. I spoke to a public defender. And I'm like, well, he works for the government, the same government that's prosecuting you. And their goal isn't to defend you.
Anything you say can and will be used against you.
Exactly.
I mean, I was talking about the shooting in Houston, and you just have the Soros, district attorney who is going to try to charge the guy who shot the person who was involved in an armed robbery, and so he's not talking to them. He had a lawyer go in and say, yeah, the guy that you're looking for is my client. He's got nothing to say. He's innocent. Prove it. And that's the way it needs to go. But the problem is, and this is one of the key things that people need to understand about every government interaction now, is pretty much an interaction with a bureaucracy that created the rules, a bureaucracy that has excessive punishment at the end of it, a bureaucracy that says this isn't a law, this is a rule from us. Therefore, you have no presumption of innocence and you have no protection against excessive punishment or anything else. And, we're going to just assess these things to you. That's what people need to understand. That has now become a common baseline throughout our government in terms of its interaction. It's been adopted everywhere, in the federal government and the state governments as well. They've all taken that approach, and it is a complete inversion of the way things are supposed to work. But they've been able to eradicate all due process and constitutional protections by saying, well, we're a bureaucracy. We're not, and we've got rules, but you only get protection for laws, and that's the thing. And that's why people need to understand. You don't participate in this process, and you got to just be silent, even when you say, "Well, I've got nothing to hide." That's everybody's instinct, but you can't do that.
Understood. And I tell my clients that all the time, Dave. You're 100% correct. I'm like, keep quiet. If you need to consult an attorney, consult an attorney. If you can't afford one, still keep quiet.
Yes.
They have to prove things against you. You don't have to say, well, I can just resolve this with a conversation. I'm like, no, it's a machine. It's a money-making machine. It's a self-preserving machine. They need to have children in order to have jobs. And so I've spoken to many social workers, and many social workers have come forward saying what you're saying is 100% correct. We will actually put in a recommendation that the child be left at home in the parent's custody. Maybe we can do some special services. We'll go back and our reports will be overridden by the supervisor. Our supervisor will tell us to change our reports and to recommend that the child be removed. And then they find out later on, well, why is this being done? It's being done because based on the Title IV Funding Act, the only time the states receive their 50% allotment from the federal government is when the child is removed from the home on that very first court hearing. So, when people say, I don't understand, I'm like, well, because you don't understand, the game that's been put into play.
That's right.
And it's trying to get that message out. Elon Musk now is coming forward and you're looking at all of the things that are being exposed that, happen behind the scenes. How people are being canceled, how the pharmaceutical companies are saying, don't tell people about natural remedies, for health. The same thing is at CPS. It's just like, I have a feeling, and it's just my own personal feeling. We were doing very, very well prior to COVID. We were growing exponentially. We were able to help a lot of parents. COVID has come back and turned things on its head. We are still, helping the parents, but I feel, quote unquote, that I'm being canceled or censored by the government. I'm constantly being sent grants and opportunities to obtain money. But whenever I apply for the money, I'm told, well, we decided to give the money to something COVID related or, or something of that nature. And I'm just like, but, you still have all these children that need to be represented and that you've taken from their parents, even during COVID,
and what happened with COVID? I mean, you've got a situation where everybody's supposed to be afraid of the virus and nobody goes out and interacts with anybody. And yet the government doesn't seem to have that concern. They still go out and interact with people, and they were confiscating kids during COVID, right?
They were, they were confiscating kids, and it was more difficult because now they're trying to do this via Zoom. So you can't visit your children because your children have been put into a foster home. COVID restrictions were in place. So it was 100 times worse than it was prior to COVID because the parents couldn't visit their children, and then CPS had total control. And so the judge does everything under the guise of CPS supervision.
Wow.
And so he gives them the ultimate decision.
Wow.
Even though visitation, as an example, is a requirement by law, they always put in this stipulation, under the supervision or the guise of CPS. So CPS can say, yes, I know the judge ordered visitation, but we don't think, visitation is appropriate or in order. So we're not going to allow visitation. And that happens, quite often also. So during COVID, the parents would be, being hammered, and they were separated from their kids, couldn't see their kids. All the hearings were virtual. And so, they were having problems with the meetings. The parents who weren't, a number didn't have the discretionary income to have these high-end laptops and things of that nature to communicate with the courts. They're trying to do things virtually on their phones and things of that nature. It was a mess, David.
And I imagine that, to some of the usual charges, they make a lot of these charges against people who homeschool. People say, oh, you're homeschooling your kids, you must be evil, trying to hide something. I imagine there were a lot of charges brought by CPS against parents because they did not want to get their kids vaccinated as well.
That is correct. And what the parents needed to do is, and New Jersey's different than other states. I'm back in New Jersey from Minnesota. I moved back to New Jersey. And so now I'm fighting a whole another regime, which is quite different. But you had to write a letter. At least New Jersey hasn't taken away that religious exemption that New York did. New York has said no more exemptions based upon religion. New Jersey still has it. So you need to write a letter based upon religious exemptions, so you can still deny vaccinations. But if a doctor recommends it, now you have to go get another doctor to refute it, whatever that vaccination or that you wanted. So if you didn't want your child vaccinated, you could send in a letter for religious exemptions. And if you didn't send in the letter, then CPS was at your house saying that this was not in the welfare, the best interest of the child. And a lot of parents didn't know that. School would say, you got to get them vaccinated. And then the parents would be like, okay, but I don't want to. And then that's when the fight with CPS commences.
Yeah. I remember when that happened back in May of 2019. Oh, we got measles going around, and Trump said, yeah, they got to get vaccinated. I don't care if it's a private religious school. They still got to get vaccinated. So, it's going around. So we really got to do this. And, it was basically New York, I think, and California that were doing that. Coercing everybody over that. So at your site, you have, I think, some instructional videos that you still have there talking about how to interact if CPS comes to your house. Is that correct?
That's correct. The number one thing that we say, so I put together the CPS and instructional training guides for parents. There are 11 videos out there now with PDF handouts. So if they go into YouTube, I have a link on the website just to download the PDF, and it's also the link is in the YouTube video. But each video tells parents what to do when CPS comes knocking at your door. So it's from the very first meeting all the way through the terminacy proceedings. The people we've been the most successful with are people who are not afraid. The minute CPS knocks on their door, they're scouring the internet looking for information, and they contact us. Those are people we can really help because they look at the videos and say, okay, here's what I'm not supposed to do right away. And here's how I fight CPS. Here's how I counter CPS. And so a lot of people have provided accolades as it relates to that information and just things they just didn't know, which apply across the nation as it relates to due process and what they should and should not say if CPS comes knocking at the door.
Yeah, and of course, you're focused on the front end of the process. You talked about how much money there is that is being released to them if they get custody of the child. The federal government rewards that financially. And I remember in the early days of homeschooling, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, because there were so many people that were getting CPS called on them because they were homeschooling. It would be the school system would call CPS on them or neighbors or something like that. And they would give them the same advice. They'd say, don't talk to anybody. Say, I'm going to call my lawyer and call us, that type of thing. And, but that's on the front side. And it's very important for people to understand that before the kids are stolen. But and that's your focus, and that's a good focus. But as you pointed out, there's so many incentives that are financial, just within the government. But there's a lot of other illicit stuff that happens to kids in custody. We're constantly getting reports. There was one just a couple of months ago about a kid. They had video of it. The person who was with the foster parent thing was trying to encourage a young girl to be a prostitute. And this type of human trafficking is another aspect of it. But people look at it and say, yeah, that's one issue. But there's billions of dollars to be had just from the federal government if you take the kids out. But talk about some of the things that happen to kids under the custody of CPS.
Well, one of the things that happens is that if your child is not vaccinated, so say you don't believe in vaccinations and you have this exemption, one of the first things that CPS does, because they have all of these contracts with doctors and psychiatrists, is that your child gets vaccinated. So if your child is unvaccinated, they will load your child up with vaccines, and then they bill back the doctors, who bill back, or rather the doctors bill the insurance companies who bill back CPS, who in turn bill you back also. So, you don't have custody and control of your child. You're just still required to pay for everything. You're still required to keep insurance, give them all of your doctor's information, and then they decide, what they are going to do, because now they have total custody and control. Almost all the children in CPS custody are given psychological counseling or therapy. And so when I question this, I'm like, I don't understand. Why are you giving all these children therapy? Well, we're giving them therapy because we separated the children from their families, and we know that this traumatizes the children. So we have to give them therapy right off the bat because we've removed them from their caregivers.
Wow.
So,
and I imagine that psychological therapy, since we last talked, I imagine that includes a lot of, well, you sure what gender you are? Look at our chart here. We got 6 genders. Which one would you like to be? That type of thing, right?
Well, there was a, and I can send it to you. It's funny you should say that, though, because now CPS is allowing any kind of couple to foster and adopt children. And so I was actually looking at a video where they put an African-American boy who was about 5 years old with 2 men, two gay men.
Yeah.
And for some unknown reason, I don't know why, they were filming this, trying to get the child to interact with the men and say, well, it's okay to have 2 men, and trying to promote this. And the kid, who was a foster kid, was having nothing to do with it. And I found it comical. He was like, get away from me. You're 2 men. You're not supposed to be. No, I'm not going to hug you. I'm not going to kiss you. It's all right for us to kiss. And the 2 men were kissing and hugging. You can do that. And the little boy was like, no way. So I wanted, I saved that because I said, see, this is what happens. You're trying to traumatize children under the guise of protecting them.
That's right.
And the boy is telling them, this is not wrong. This is a 5-year-old. So, literally they,
he had some parents who were who were giving him an understanding of that, and they took him away and put him with these other people. Right. It is absolutely amazing what our government has turned into. And again, that wasn't even a thing when I last talked to you, but that is now the focus, it seems like, of schools and everything else, focus on transitioning kids, telling them that they're in the wrong body and all the rest of this stuff. It's absolutely insane what is happening. Now,
and CPS is taking the kids based upon this. So we're fighting cases like that now, David, the child will go to the counselor, say, I'm afraid to tell my parents that I'm non-binary or whatever. Right. And then CPS gets involved and says, your child is afraid of you, it's not in the best interest of your child. We will take the child. And now we will give them gender drugs or whatever they want to do because they're over 12 years old and it's their say to do what they want to do with their body. And so now CPS, unbeknownst to the parents, because your kid just went to the counselor and said, I'm feeling X, Y, or Z or non-binary. My high school son was having fits. He graduated 2 years ago, but he said, I can't say anything. I don't know what to do. If I say or do anything, I'm in the crosshairs of the administration and CPS and things of that nature. So the parent, that's another way for CPS to come into your house now, is through your children saying, I'm afraid to tell my parents X, Y, and Z.
Or, perhaps if you got a kid who's got his head on straight and he's not going along with the gender grooming and all the rest of this stuff. Oh, well, you must have a family where they're very hateful and intolerant, and maybe we need to take you away from that family. It is amazing when you look at it. All of this stuff really goes back to parental rights. That is a central issue that is being violated by CPS and the way that they are operating without due process, operating preemptively, and that you're guilty before you're proven innocent. But now this has metastasized the same thing that used to be just located at CPS primarily. That's now metastasized in the school system at large. And, they are actively, as I point out, from Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine, they are actively trying to remove any knowledge of the parents in terms of they start grooming the kids with gender stuff and don't tell the parents, driving that wedge there. If the parents find out and want to do something about it, now they will bring in CPS, as you pointed out, to finish this up. It is absolutely insidious. For the longest time, Dwight, about, I guess it was back in 2008, I think, I did a thing for an organization that was focused on parental rights, and they were talking about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And so, it sounds like a really positive, we're going to talk about children's rights. Well, they posit children's rights as in opposition to parental rights. And if you're going to focus on the children's rights, then basically the parents have no right. And it's going to be the government that is going to be advocating for the children to maintain that they can be independent of the parent. And this UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has been passed by every nation except for the United States. But it was being run through, when we're talking about 2008, 2009, it was being run through by an activist judiciary. And now you can add to all of that stuff, the school bureaucracies as well as CPS.
Correct. And what I found equally disturbing is there's been, in conjunction with the UN agenda, there's been a parental rights amendment that's come up in committee year after year after year.
Mm-hmm. That was what I was working with, was the people were trying to push the parental rights amendment. Very simple. Right. It was like 2 sentences, 1 paragraph and everything. And, and they want to shut that down. And it is a global thing. As I said, the only country that is not formally declared that they're part of this UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is the U.S., but we have all the judiciary, all the bureaucracies, the educational establishment. They're all focused on that, on enforcing it by de facto.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what's been disturbing me, because all of the other socialist countries, Norway, Sweden, all of these countries, CPS, people are more afraid of CPS than the police. And it's starting to become that way in the United States also. It's not, you'll look at it and you'll say, okay, well, the laws are written a certain way, but they haven't completely stripped parents of their parental rights, but in essence, they really have, based upon the way the system works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when you say you have parental rights, all of the case law that has been written as of late always leans toward the best interest of the child. It used to be parental rights, and now they've taken that out of almost all the wording across the United States and put in best interest of the child. Mm-hmm. So, and in fact, they're saying you no longer have your rights. The government has the right to determine what is the best interest of the child. And so, if you want to homeschool or if you want to do anything, you need to understand the dynamics of what you're going to do. And then I tell everyone, don't let CPS in your house. I mean, I literally did that. I took my children out of school and homeschooled them during COVID, we were, here again, like anyone, CPS came knocking at my door, and because I know, I'm like, guys picked the wrong person to come knocking at the front door. I won, and I'm just like, no, can I come in? No. Can I talk to you? No. Can we talk to your son? No. No. Go prove your case. Have a nice day. And so they ended up filing a petition, and I'm like, all right. And I won, of course, but I knew what to do. Mm-hmm. I'm like, prove it. I said, here are my doctors. Where are your doctors? Yeah. Not your allegations. Where are your doctors?
That's right.
Right. You can't prove it. Bye. And the judge dismissed it. He had to dismiss it because I understood, and I'm trying to help other parents understand. Just stay quiet and tell them, come up with your evidence, and that's it. You know.
And I
That's
hope
part of
that people understand that, because, I think a lot of people look at this and say, well, CPS, I don't need to worry about CPS. I'm not doing anything. Just like they say when they show up at your door. People will look at this and say, well, I don't need to watch Dwight's videos because I'm never going to be visited by CPS. You need to be forearmed about all this stuff, and that's the reason why I wanted to have you on again, Dwight. People need to be fully aware of what our government is capable of, and knowing that you can be put in the crosshairs at any time for any reason, and you don't have to do anything that is criminal, and you should actively look out for your own rights, because the government is not going to be there to protect your rights. I mean, that is the purpose of government. That's what the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is about. We create governments to defend our God-given rights, but the government is about taking those away at this point in time. So you have to understand that that is always a possibility, even though you're not doing anything wrong, and be forewarned and forearmed, and understand what you're how to oppose this system, and not to put yourself and your children in jeopardy, because once they take your kids away, that's just such a heartbreaking thing to have happen. And I say this to people, understand that this is getting bigger and bigger, as you were just talking about, Dwight. You may have CPS get involved simply because of this transgender issue in public schools. They may use CPS as an additional wedge to put between you and your kids, to take away your kids so they can transition them. So everybody in this environment is at danger if you got your kids in a public school. And then, of course, if you're homeschooling, that's a different way that they might come after you. But you're especially in danger if you're in the public schools because of this transgender grooming that's going on right now.
Correct. And you can't say anything. You as a parent, I mean, I know firsthand, I've gone and I'm like, I don't approve of some of the curriculum. So my son will not be attending these classes. No, you don't have a right to say that. Once that child crosses the threshold, we, the government, the school system, what we decide is going to be the curriculum is what your child will be taught. And you have no say-so in the matter. And if you don't like our curriculum, your choices are to A, take them out and put them in a private school that agrees with your philosophy of life, or B, to homeschool that child.
That's right.
And if you decide to homeschool, please do something computer-based. I'm going to give a little tip here. Mm-hmm. Don't just say, I'm going to homeschool. Put together a curriculum. There's a lot of online schools, Time for Learning. I'm not trying to give them a plug. That's one of the ones I use, but there's others. Make sure you have a written curriculum, and that there's, they're doing this daily and doing tests, because you don't want to open the door on the backside for truancy or neglect on that side.
That's right.
88% of the children taken from parents are not from physical abuse or sexual abuse. It's for neglect. And neglect is anything the government says it is.
It could be not giving them vaccines.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Or not following a doctor's recommendation. Amanda Weber took her child. If you remember Amanda Weber from a few years ago, she just popped into my head. But she took her child to the doctor, and the doctor said the child was fine. And so she went home, and the next thing CPS is at her door. The next day we won that case for her. But it's something as simple as going to the doctor. We took and I'm thinking of this, and the doctors now, they're making the doctors our enemy. They're pitting parents against doctors, and I think children are not getting the well care, the pre-illness treatment, because parents are afraid. I'm like, if I go to the doctor and I say this, doctors are mandatory reporters. And so took our daughter to get her last physical, and my daughter was talking about like traveling to the moon and so on and so forth. And the doctor was like, And then my daughter made some comment about, falling down and hurting her leg. And the doctor immediately snapped, hurt your leg. How'd you hurt your leg? What happened? And we're like looking at the doctor like, are you an idiot? She was just telling you she was on the moon and traveling on the moon. Nothing. The doctor was like, The minute she hurt her leg, the doctor's focus zeroed in. What happened? What'd you do? How'd you do it?
Yeah, because kids are not supposed to be outside playing or anything. They're supposed to be sitting on a couch looking at TV, I guess. And so, if you hurt your leg, that's evidence of neglect, because you got a parent who's letting you outside the house or something. Yeah, it is absolutely incredible how things are rapidly transforming. And you pointed out that, as we think of it, we think, well, abuse, we think violence or sexual abuse. And as you pointed out, 80% of those don't have anything to do with it. That's not even an allegation, right?
No, no. I found out, and it was alarming. And this is the degree that I need to get across to parents. So my son was going to soccer practice on his bicycle. My son fell on his bicycle on his way to soccer practice. He gets to practice. The coach are like, "You okay? You're like some bruises." He says, "Yeah, I fell on my way here on my bike." Right? Come to find out, and I didn't know this because CPS ended up disregarding it. That coach called CPS on my son because he fell off his bike on his way to soccer practice. And I found out maybe like 2 years later, with this COVID homeschooling thing, and it comes out, and I'm just like, well, what are you talking about? I know nothing about this. So I guess, CPS at that time, they call it ruling it out. Mm-hmm. But the mere fact that my soccer coach called CPS, on me and my son that I was not made aware of, when my son tells him, I fell off my bike on my way here to practice. Wow. And that's why I have, this scrape and bruise on my leg. And the coach still called CPS. So parents need to be aware. Something as little as falling off your bike gives mandatory reporters like doctors and teachers now are mandatory. I mean, they must call and report any injury that they see. And so it's gotten to be a mess, David. It really has.
I grew up as a free range kid, and our role models were the little rascals who were out there building, doing all kinds of dangerous stuff all the time.
I know.
And it's like, well, that's really cool, but I don't know how. But even if you did something like the little rascals actually did when I was a kid, they wouldn't call the cops on your parents. But now it's amazing how they've tightened the noose. But especially this whole thing about what is happening with transgender issues and transitioning kids, they have a fixation on that, and that's going to manifest itself in CPS. So, I mean, you talk about, sexual abuse. That's really where it's coming from. It's coming from our government that's right. Sexually abusing the kids and then using that as a premise to come after kids. So everybody needs to understand what is going on with this, and I really do appreciate what you do. And again, to let everybody know, at your website, you have videos that go through the whole process, what you can expect and how you can interact with them in a safe way, what you the right way to proceed with anything like this. If it's something about, some teacher reports that your kid's injured because they fell off their bike or something and they get CPS after you, because that does happen. That was the discretion of CPS not to go any further with this. But if they did go further with this, and if you didn't follow the procedures that you talk about, you could wind up losing your kid. And and it could be very, very serious. And so what is the name of that website again?
FamilyPreservationFoundation.org. I also have a shortcut link called FPF1.org. Okay. If that's easier for people to remember.
Okay. FamilyPreservationFoundation.org.
Correct.
That's good. Before you go, though, let's talk a little bit about, you said NRA, and you're in New Jersey.
Correct.
That's got to be one of the hardest places to comply with any firearms anywhere, is in New Jersey. Talk about what it's like to be not just a gun owner, but a firearms instructor in New Jersey.
Well, believe it or not, we have about 1 million firearm owners in New Jersey. Out of 8.8 million people, that might not seem significant, but for an anti-gun state, that really is quite significant.
Yeah.
So when the Bureaucracy decision went down this past summer and the Supreme Court said that we had the right to bear arms, there was, a deluge of applications for carry permits, because prior to last summer, no one could get a permit to carry a firearm. We could only go from our house to the range or our house to the gun store and back. Mm. So now, on July 4th, I was like, here's my application for my gun permit. But everyone was just like right away. So I think they got about 200,000 applications almost immediately, for their for gun permits, for a right to carry. And a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't tell people, you shouldn't say these things. I said, no. I said, people need to get comfortable. It is a constitutional right. As a matter of fact, it was the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Yeah. It was so important. Free speech was one, and if you want free speech, you need two
That's
to allow yourself to be able to speak freely. So we in New Jersey have been advocates. Governor Murphy just signed into law this sweeping gun reform bill in response to Bureaucracy. Well, when I say we, because a lot of gun groups that I belong to and donate to, got a TRO stopping all the sensitive carry. It went from just government buildings and courthouses.
The sensitive places like they did in New York. They did that in New Jersey as well. Yeah.
Correct. So we got an injunction on Monday to say all those sensitive places are unconstitutional and they will not be enforced. So because everyone had stopped carrying, everyone that got their carry permit had literally stopped carrying.
Mm-hmm.
So as an instructor, I tell people that they need to understand their constitutional rights, but they also need to understand the rights of New Jersey and its gun laws, because certain things will get you locked up no matter what. It's kind of interesting. You were talking about Houston. On my, I have about 50,000 followers on my firearms training page called Elite Noir. And I put up that video and I said, based upon self-defense and your constitutional rights, was what this person did valid? What should he have done? And I'm not trying to be a Monday morning quarterback. We all think he's a hero. I said, if he needs a legal defense fund, he should set up a GoFundMe. But that's not what I'm saying. I said, I'm looking at the law and what the law says he should have done. And I said, you hear what the Attorney General is saying and the prosecutors are saying because of how the law is written. And the law basically says it needs to be imminent threat for you to use deadly force. Shooting anyone in the back in any state in the nation is not imminent threat. If the guy had swung the gun around or started turning back toward him, then we could say, okay, it was imminent threat. I said, but the state's going to have to prove that the guy was walking out the store, which it looks like he was doing. I said, but you can clearly see that the gentleman shot him from behind. And I said, while he's a hero in my regard, I said, I'm going to tell you what the state is going to say.
Right.
I said, not me. So don't jump on me. Don't kill the messenger.
I talked to my sons about that, and we mentioned a couple of times in the show, and I mentioned that there's a Soros district attorney that is putting him up before the grand jury now, and so he showed it again earlier in the program, and as I was talking about it with my sons, and they've taken firearms classes as well, and they said, yeah, but it's, and the Texas law says not only to stop a threat to you, but to stop a threat to other people. He was still pointing the gun, even though he had his back to this guy, he was still pointing the gun at other people. So I think he would be covered with that. My only concern is how this Soros district attorney will handle the fact that he kept shooting the guy when the guy was down and didn't even appear to be moving. When he went over to get the gun from the guy, he's still shooting him, and then he bends down to get the gun, he gives him another shot, and it's like, that's going to be, I don't think they're going to win on the, he wasn't pointing the gun at that guy, he wasn't pointing the gun at the defender, we'll call him. But I think that was still okay, especially under Texas law. But I think that they might say, well, finishing him off that way, that's the thing where I think he's maybe has some legal jeopardy in that. What do you think?
Well, what most people don't know, and is one of the things we teach, we talk about the psychological and the physiological response. Are you ready to take a life? So there's a lot that goes into, I teach a 16-hour class. So it's the NRA basic CCW, 50-state CCW course. And so we actually go into all that, David. And what happens is that there's time dilation, sensory deprivation. There's all these things that are going on when your adrenaline starts rushing. So I think there is an argument to be made that, if you really look at the time period, it was very short. Even though it was multiple shots, it was still very short. When I say very short, 30 seconds is not long, especially, when your adrenaline is elevated and you don't know, and you might have thought he moved,
Yeah,
because I thought he moved, and I shot him again. So
that's right.
there's a lot that goes into that, and I think an argument can be made, and I, I'm hopeful that he gets off. I know the arguments that the state is going to try to make, but I do think he'll be able to provide a defense, and any doctor will come in and talk about these things, the physiological and the psychological responses that occur when you're in that type of situation. And there's plenty of research that discusses what happens, which is one of the reasons why we talk about it. And we talk about just that situation. So I put that out to the group. Everyone came out, with different feedback. It was interesting to see all the feedback that came from across the nation for the different people that followed the page.
So something just occurred to me as well. When I talk about that, again, I think the guy is covered under Texas law, even though he wasn't pointing the gun at him. He was still pointing the gun at other people who knew what he was going to do next. And if they go back and look at this guy's rap sheet, you find that he was already part of a group that had killed a store owner at a cell phone store as part of an armed robbery. So, this guy's basically doing the same thing, and that owner did get killed. And so, they can bring that up in the trial. But I think when you talk about the number of shots, as I said, my biggest concern where you might have legal exposure is those additional shots. When I took my concealed carry class, it was taught by a guy who was former Secret Service. And he said, let me tell you, he said, this is not like the movies where you shoot once and the guy's down and it's over with. And he can use that for his defense as well. Because he said, let me give you a true example here. He said the FBI had closed in on a guy, and they were in a room, 3 FBI agents and 1 individual who was an expert at martial arts. And rather than submitting to the arrest, he decided he was going to fight these FBI agents who were all armed, and they shot him. And he bled to death in 30 seconds. But before he bled to death, he killed all 3 of them with his bare hands. And he said, so, if you shoot somebody, you keep shooting until they're not moving. And so that really is, I think he should be covered. But of course, we're talking about Houston. We're talking about a place where they can elect the Soros district attorney. So again, the political aspects of it, but I think from a legal standpoint, even from an ethical standpoint, he should be covered. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. But that is the reality that, you don't, this is not like the kid with his Red Ryder BB gun. You shoot them once in the butt and they're gone. I mean, this is real life. That doesn't happen. And even if the guy's bleeding to death in, just 30 seconds, he can still kill 3 people.
And here's what's going to happen, I think, with this case, because it's so high profile. I concur with you. I think he will be covered, even with the additional shots. But what the state does is they will drag it out, and so people who have a very short attention span, and that was what was done with CPS in our case. And when we were going to the Supreme Court, they drug it out for 2 years, and so the people start dropping off. And then once the following starts dropping off, then they're saying, now we can do whatever we want because you no longer have the attention. And so I'm just hoping that justice is done speedily in Houston, because as you said, with a Soros prosecutor, now we're sitting here saying he understands the government and the wheels and how it turns. He understands the memory of people are short. What was in the news today will not be in the news 3 months from now. That's right. So if this is kept quiet, and you and I both know the legal process in the judiciary is long and lengthy. There's no such thing as a speedy trial anymore. Even to get your child back, they have 90 days. This, the state has 60 days to collect evidence, and then they have to present in 90. Well, if this gun case goes the same way in 90 days, how many people will still be talking about Houston?
That's right.
Very, very few. And so unless he has advocates on the other side, keeping this in the news and keeping people informed, or, starting a GoFundMe to collect email addresses to send it out to people, they're going to wait for this to die down, and then they're going to do exactly what they want to do. That's right. And so it's disturbing, but this trend goes with everything now. The government literally outweights you. They outspend you, and they'll put in delay after delay, on another adjournment, on another adjournment.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, this is supposed to been taken care of in 60 days.
Yep.
Speedy trial request.
Yeah. They wear you down. I just interviewed a doctor yesterday. They're coming after him because he talked during COVID about vitamin D and zinc. And they said, well, because you were on radio and TV, we think 12 million impressions, and we're going to fine you $40,000 per impression. He's looking at a $500 billion, 12 million people and $40,000 each, and he's looking at $500 billion fine. They just figured that they would ramp that thing up, and he just caved to it. But it is a long, drawn-out process. They try to wear you down through attrition. And as you point out, if everybody forgets about this guy, I think it's going to be very important for him because the Second Amendment organizations are not going to let this die out. They're going to advocate for this guy. And that's why your CPS your Family Preservation Foundation organization is important. Because I've told people over and over again, forget political parties, forget politicians for the most part. We need to organize issue by issue, just as we've seen with the Second Amendment and with gun rights. We need to do that issue by issue. And that's why what you're doing with CPS is so important, because you're focusing on this attack on parental rights that is now metastasized through so many different facets, especially through the schools. And people need to have an advocate. They need to have the knowledge of how the government is possibly going to come after any of us. We never know. And how to deal with this thing. That's why the real reality is that we got to focus issue by issue. And I think, Dwight, you got one of the best takes on it, because you experienced this yourself personally. You know what this is about, and what can happen, and what and how to defend against it. And people really do need to see that. And there's not many organizations out there that are really focused on CPS. A lot of people focus in terms of doing reporting on what happens to kids once they get stolen. All this human trafficking and prostitution and abduction and all this other kind of stuff, which is horrible. But nobody really talks about how do you keep them from stealing your kid in the first place, and that's what you're really focused on.
And the part that I find so ironic, David, is that they will take a child from a family and pay a stranger $1,000 a month to take care of this family, instead of giving that money to the family if there is some shortcoming to help, that family keep its child. And so that's the bizarreness of our system. And it keep traced all the way back to the Clintons. I mean, they're the ones who signed this law into effect. Bill Clinton did. And I was looking at something a few years ago that he had put out as it relates to CPS and the prison system. And he said, had he known then what he knows now, those two laws wouldn't have been signed into law, And you're like, well, it's a little late now, you could say that in hindsight,
Yeah, I heard the same thing from the guy who pushed the Vietnam War. Well, if I would have known now what I knew then, I wouldn't have done it. Robert McNamara says, sorry about that. Mistakes were made. We're hearing that now from the people who pushed all this lockdown and vilification of everybody who didn't do every little COVID ritual that they had for. Sorry, can we have amnesty? You always hear that. I didn't know any better. But that's the key thing. They want your kids, no doubt about it. They're getting paid to steal your kids. And then, they can get paid on the black market as well. But even with the federal government, they get paid to steal your kids. And as you pointed out, in 80% of those cases, they just say, well, you're not taking care of them sufficiently. And as you point out, they'll give the money to total strangers who will do who knows what, rather than helping the family to overcome what they say is insufficient care, neglect, and that type of thing. So it just really underscores what the true agenda is here, I think. So you got a Facebook page about guns. It's called Elite Noir. Is that correct?
Yes,
is that a Facebook
that's
page?
Correct.
Okay, good.
Right, and that's also our website. It's elitenoir.com.
Good.
It's what's interesting, just since we're talking about guns, they're using this as a mechanism in New Jersey to try and get into the homes also. They're trying to dictate in this new legislation. I'm not, it's being challenged, of course, in the courts. But I tell people, keep your guns locked up, keep them in safes, don't keep them on the dresser drawers. I'm an advocate of metal safes. If you can get the large refrigerator safes, great. If not, get some sort of metal safe. Don't just put it in a gun box or take your gun case and put padlocks on them and put them in the top of your closet.
Mm-hmm.
This is another way they're going to use to try and come in the back door and
Mm-hmm.
say that you have unsafe housing conditions, or you're putting your child in a dangerous position.
Yes.
So tell all the parents to be aware of that also. That's another way, especially if you own guns, make sure you keep them locked up.
That's
But,
right.
the number one thing is to keep CPS out of your house and never let them in your house
That's right.
at all. Like
They'll use the public schools as a way to get in and snoop around. They'll use your fact that you own guns as a way to come in and snoop around. So you need to know what your legal rights are. And Dwight has videos talking about that, how to protect your family. Because that's why you've got a gun in the first place, right? Is to protect your family.
Right.
You need to know how to protect your family from the biggest enemy, which is going to be the government coming after your family.
And I tell people in New Jersey, David, it's fine. I said, you saw that in Houston? I said, don't try that in New Jersey. I said, that will not work in New Jersey. Like, what are you talking about? I said, it's specifically codified that the threat has to be to you specifically and or your loved ones.
Yeah.
I said, you cannot play the Lone Ranger here in New Jersey. I said, you will get locked up.
Yeah.
And I said, so I've been telling people since that Houston video came out, I said, we're not Texas.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's covered in Texas, but he wouldn't be covered. But I've covered stories in New Jersey. I remember one in particular. A guy was moving, and he wasn't even moving to New Jersey. He was moving between states, and he was a licensed carry, guy and all this kind of stuff. And he didn't show up at his relative's house in New Jersey at the time they thought. So they contacted the police. The police saw his license plate or whatever and identified him, pulled him over, and then they start, can we, snooping around, see if they can find something. Can we look in your trunk? They open up, he says, sure, yeah, I got nothing to hide, right? Just like we were talking about with CPS. They open up the trunk, and he's got, clothes and suitcases and other kinds of possessions and everything. They go through everything, and at the very bottom of the trunk, locked, they find some guns that were down at the bottom. It's like, oh, you're not allowed to have these in New Jersey, and they haul him off to jail. I mean, it's just, again, there's so many traps out there. It's like Harvey Silverglate. He said, everybody's violating. We got so many different laws on the books. Everybody's committing 3 felonies a day on average.
That's right.
So
you're 100% correct.
Yeah, that's where we are now in America.
But I like you said, I tell everyone, every single one of my students, especially if they have a gun. If a police officer says, "Can I search your car?" The answer is no. Even if you don't have a gun in your car, I said I still take lessons. I'm a former veteran, and I also have I've been having firearms for like 30 years, and I still take lessons. I compete in USPSA, so I take lessons on a Friday basis. But my coach, who is a grandmaster, was saying how he got stopped in New Jersey. I said, and he said the same thing. I have nothing to hide. The state police kept him on the side of the road for 3.5 hours, going through all of his equipment, trying to find something that was wrong. They were literally like going through the statutes, looking at his handguns.
Wow.
So I tell everyone, I said, yeah, see, even my coach, who's a grandmaster, one of the top shooters in the United States, got stopped and was held for 3.5 hours. So I tell everyone, I said, no warrant, no search.
Yeah, it's a fishing expedition. Fishing expedition. Well, thank you. It's always great talking to you, Dwight. I didn't know about the firearms side of you, but good for you on that as well. The organization is familypreservationfoundation.org. Make sure if you got children, make sure, you're not protected. If you got children, no matter where you live, you need to go to Dwight's website and educate yourself about how to protect your family from the legal snares that are out there. Thank you so much, Dwight. Great talking to you.
Thank you, David. A pleasure as always.
Thank you.